Right, so this is a quick and dirty introduction to surround in Logic, or at least setting it up. I've opened Logic and I've created a new document, and by default you get this panel which invites you to make some new tracks. I'm making audio tracks, and helpfully it's already asked me whether I want, or at least it gives me the options for output as to whether I want that to be stereo or mono or surround. So I'm going to choose a surround track, and making create, I get a track that looks very much like any other track that you'd make, but the panning control here is a kind of a surround sound panner. I'll make that a little bit bigger, not that it actually doesn't make any difference to the size of that. But that's duplicated down here with the surround panner in the mixer display. And I can double click on that and it comes up with an easier to see version of that. I can move the hockey puck around. You can see it also moving in the miniature display on the track. So this is looks like a mono channel. There's one single puck, and as I move it round, notice that there's this kind of sphere, this area of influence, or at least an indication of how that's going to influence the speakers. So if I've got my puck at this particular position, we can see that although the likelihood is that the majority of the signal will be from this big speaker, it will be distributed also to this one down at the left hand corner, through the centre, through the right, and well, it probably won't. There might be a little bit of signal coming out of here to imply through the phantom image that the image reaches round to this point here. So, and as I move that around, obviously that sphere or that area of influence changes. So I can move it closer to the individual speakers to make it more specific to that particular point. So at the moment, it's only really going to be heard out of the centre channel. So that's one thing to observe about the panning control. Another thing to observe is that the centre level here is, well, you have the option of turning it up or down, so quite independently of whether you move the puck closer or further away from the centre channel, you can turn the centre level up or down. This is really so that if you have dialogue in film, assuming that you were using your 5.1 setup for the purposes of making film, for example, you can bias the level or attenuate the level of that centre channel. You can also, by the way, I think if you, I don't know, does it? No, it doesn't. It doesn't default to the original level when you double click it. You can turn off the centre channel altogether by clicking on the speaker in the panning control, so you can turn that off totally. Obviously you can do that with the other speakers as well, should you wish to. There might be some circumstances where you want that to happen. I'm not sure I can think of any right now. You might turn off these two so that you have an image that comes from the centre. It might be more more noticeably sort of centre with a little bit of the surround channels. Actually, what's probably more likely is that you turn off your surrounds, but you bring your puck further down so that your sphere, so that the relative levels in each of these three channels is reasonably equal, but you nevertheless don't get anything from your rear channels. That's probably a much more likely scenario. Anyway, I'll turn these back on. Finally, at the bottom of this panning controller, you have the LFE level, and this enables you to choose how much of the signal from this track is going to your low frequency effects channel. So at the moment I don't want any of it going there, so it's on as low as it can be, or mute. So this is all very well. I've kind of shown you the anatomy of the panner, but what you'll need to be able to do is to set up the tracks to be of the type of surround that you want. You notice that when I started, Logic gives you the option of making a surround track. It doesn't tell you what kind of surround track. So let's choose what kind of surround track I mean, and when you see the options you'll see what I'm talking about. So in order to do that, you need to go to Logic's preferences and to its audio preferences. And obviously you'll need to check that your output device is set up appropriately. I don't want mine going to the built-in output, I want it to go to a Motu 828 that I'm connected to, but obviously you need to choose your preferred interface. Then you go to the I/O assignments, and this is what I'm talking about. So surround, show as. So again, Logic kind of considers surround to be a kind of default scenario, but it doesn't tell you how many channels, how many speakers you're working with. You do that via preferences, and then your entire project operates in relation to that particular setup. So you could choose for your entire project to be quadraphonic, for example, and that will give you speakers at the four corners of a room, for example. LCRS will give you left, centre, surround, and left, centre, right, and surround. So 3 speakers at the front of your setup, and then 1 surround channel behind you. And then 5.1, 6.1, 7.1 are basically different arrangements of speakers in kind of commercial multi-channel setups. So 5.1 is as you saw it basically in the panner that we were looking at just a minute ago. ITU 775 is the kind of standard setup. 6.1 would give you, I think, 3 at the front, so left, centre, right, and then you'd have left surround, right surround, and then a surround right at the back. And this is obviously with a 0.1 giving you the low frequency effects channel. And 7.1 gives you 2 setups. So let's choose one of those just so that we can see a different setup in the panner. So I'll choose 7.1 just for now. We'll have to go back to the other one in a minute. Just below that option, you're given another part of this panel which allows you to choose which speakers each of the channel types go to. So your left could be sent, in this case, to output 1, your right to output 2, your left surround going to output 3, your right surround going to output 4. This is perhaps not a standard output configuration, but it just happens to be the one that is set up in the studio that I'm using. 5 is centre, 6 is LFE. Normally you'd expect it to be left, right, and then centre and LFE for channels 3 and 4, and then left surround, right surround 5 and 6, and 7 and 8 would be left mid, right mid would be 7 and 8 again. So we've done that bit. I'll come out of there and it will save those settings, hopefully without crashing my computer. It's crashed my computer, that is unhelpful. So I'll have to go back into it again. Sorry about this. I'll go away. Yeah. Okay, so fortunately it's remembered my rather basic setup from before. And audio, motor is still remembered, and I can choose 7.1 again. Let's see whether this bulks again. No, it seems to be happier this time. So theoretically what should happen, oh yeah, the other thing I'd need to change, you notice that the configuration in my panning does not change. So the other thing that I need to change, in addition to the preferences that you just saw, is the setup, the project settings for this particular session. So the project settings, which are in the file menu, also has an audio panel, and this one also has a declaration of the surround format required. So here again I will change it to the one that I chose before. I'm sure Logic has a good rationale for providing the 2 options. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but there we are. So I'm choosing 7.1, the 3 and the 4.1 version that I had up before. And having done that, hopefully going back into here. Now this gives you a different arrangement of loudspeakers. So this is basically 3 at the front and then 4 surround channels, which gives you a kind of a reasonably even distribution of speakers around your your hypothetical circle in which you are sitting. If we were to change that to, we'll have to do this, actually probably only need to do it in the project settings, but I'll do it in both. So go back to IO settings, go to 7.1 SDDS. That's a different configuration which actually is represented by this panel, whereby we have 5 basically centre speakers, so left, left centre, centre, right. What we had before was no left centre or right centre, we had left mid and right mid instead. So again, if we go now to, better come out of there, into project settings and audio, and this time if we choose SDDS, you see the configuration change. So now you can see that it's a much more forward or frontal biased image, with your surrounds only provided kind of really in the surround. So having done all of that, we're actually going to go straight back to our original settings, which were for 5.1. So let's go back here, 5.1. But it was just to show you that you have the option of a small variety, but a variety nonetheless, of multi-channel speaker setups. And those are those kind of critical bits in order to have them set up, is the preferences and then the project settings that you need to change. So as I say, I'm hoping that I might get some sound if I pull a file into here. There's no guarantee because I haven't checked, but we shall see. So I'm pulling in a mono. This is just an arbitrary sound. Ah, hurrah! So yeah, we have our mono input sound being deployed across those 5 channels, and as I move the puck around, you won't be able to hear it, but I can hear that the sounds are moving in the appropriate way between the speakers. So that's fine. Couple more things to say, but basically that's it. So having made a mono channel, and the fan on my computer is going crazy, so it's probably just as well I'm nearly done. Yeah, we need a couple more tracks. So that was a mono track. If I make a new track here, which has a surround output again, but if I look down at the mixing view, or the channel view, I can click on this and make it a stereo view. I'll get rid of this panning control because that refers to the other channel. This time you can see the panning control down here is slightly different. It hasn't just got the one puck, it's also got a kind of indication of the influence of that thing. I can't remember, maybe the other one had that as well, did it? No, it didn't. So the stereo channel has the kind of benefit of an influence. If I double click on here, now we have 3 pucks to denote how the sound is distributed. So here, this is our center puck, as it were, and that allows me to change the influence again, according to how far from the center I am, and I can move that around the panning area just as I could before. If I click on any of these, the L and the R pucks, then they will allow me to change the width of the stereo image, and thereby how much the channels are kind of isolated, I suppose, from one another. Before there was a degree of overlap, albeit small, but you could make it wider or narrower should you wish to, and then of course it maintains that relationship as you move the centre puck. Otherwise, the setup is essentially the same. Finally, you can make a surround channel. So once again, well, this time I'm just going to double click on the track display and I get a new channel, and I'm going to pull in a sound which I know is a 5.1 recorded sound. So eventually, again, didn't crash. That's a good thing. So rather unhelpfully, perhaps, Logic doesn't accommodate 5.1 views for its channels. It will only show you the first 2 channels of that. Again, I don't really know why it's like that. Perhaps in future editions, or indeed in the edition which they have released today, which this isn't, by the way, they might have done something about that. But as it is, you only see 2 channels of the 5.1 channel array. But we know that it's a round channel because if you look at this icon here, it's a 5.1, or it's a 5 kind of blips on it in a square. And you'll get that come up regardless of whether it's a 5.1 or a 6.1 or a 7.1 channel. So going back to the panning control again, and we have a very familiar view, aside from the fact that we no longer have the 2 additional channels. So this is more of a kind of bias control. So we've already got a 5.1 channel track, or at least 5 satellite channels which are going to be active or relevant here, and we are simply going to bias the image towards one side or another. So unlike the other 2 panning controls, you don't get this indication of influence or anything else, or the two additional pucks that give you left and right. What else can I say about all of this? Yeah, if we were to talk about processing, there's a variety of kind of controls that you can apply in relation to Logic's processing that will allow it to accommodate either mono, stereo, multi-mono, which basically applies the same effect to all the channels on a surround track, or I hate the word bespoke, but a purpose designed surround plugin. So you can there are kind of options in the plugins for all of those possibilities. In these panning things, though, there are some constraining quick keys if you kind of want to move this around. There is one more thing I need to say after this. So if I move this around, then it's kind of free moving. But if I press, and I'll have to remember the quick keys, I think it's Alt, yeah. Oh, Alt pops it back to the center. If you press Shift, no, it's not Shift, what is it? Control, there you go. Control constrains it to a circle, according to the to how far away from the center it is. So you notice as soon as I press Command, which I'm doing now, then you get that circle. If I were to move the puck further away, then the circle is represented rather bigger. But again, as I move it, it can only move in relation to that circle. So that's one constraining thing that ensures that if you make a movement, it's going to move in a circle. The alternative one, I think, is Command and Alt at the same time, and this one constrains it to a line going from one side of your circle to the other side. And again, depending on where you start, so if I start over here, then that line will always run through the centre of the space from one side to the other. So those constraining things might be quite helpful. Final thing to say is that you can apply automation, of course, to all of this. So to do that, now you could conceivably do this manually by drawing in your automation, and you would do that in the normal way with Logic's automation possibilities or functionality. But I'm not sure how helpful that is or how intuitive that is. So what I would recommend is that you use the automation record capabilities that are ubiquitous in in DAW software, and so we will choose touch because all I want to do is to have the automation record when I touch the control, and I just need to press play, and as I do that, remember that we are dealing with the country field one. I move that around. Now that is currently being recorded into the automation channel. Can't see it at the moment, but it is. So if I stop there, and if I were to play that back, I'll turn this touch off. You can see that it's recorded my movements. I'm sure it did. Yes, it did. There you go. So I'm not doing anything. And we can have a look at that. So if I stop that, I can go into Automation View. So if I go into A and click on Volume, then I go to Main. Oh no, there we go. It's at the bottom there. Surround, Angle, and Radius. So unlike in something like Reaper, where your two axes, X and Y axes, so Cartesian axes, are given a value, and those represent the two tracks, automation tracks, that will hold your automation data. Here, so yeah, I don't know how clear that was. It's dealing with that automation data for this two-dimensional grid on an XY basis. Here it's dealing with surround, angle, and radius, meaning that wherever your puck is, this represents the angle around the circle, and then your radius means the distance from the centre. So these are polar coordinates, essentially, that it's dealing with. And you can, having made them, you can see them represented here, and you can change them, or apparently change them. If I choose the right ones, there you go. So now you can change those if you want to. Again, it's probably not very intuitive trying to do it by hand, so you'd probably just want to record that automation again. So I didn't have anything sonically interesting particularly to show you, but this at least shows you how to set stuff up in Logic for Multichannel.